9, and we're going to start there. So, we're coming to the end of the conquest for the Israelites as they enter the promised land. That fittingly, they're starting to enjoy the fruits of the land and the spoils of victory. Remember that as soon as they crossed over the river, the very next day, that the manna had stopped, the quail had stopped, and they started eating from the fruits and the grains, and started to realize that the resources there are theirs to use. And so, towards the end of this battle, we see this, and this is the neat thing, that they do this a lot. That they gather together again before the final thrust of possessing the whole land. So we're going to sneak back here to chapter 8 and look at verse 30. Let me read to you, these verses here, 30 through 34. Then Joshua built on Mount Elba an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel. As Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded the Israelites, he built it according to what was written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses. And all the Israelites with their elders, officials, and judges were standing on both sides of the ark of the covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priests who carried it. Both the foreigners living among them and the native born were there. Half of the people stood in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them stood in front of Mount Ebla, as Moses of the servant of the Lord had formerly commanded when he gave instructions to bless the people of Israel. Afterward, Joshua read the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as was written in the law of Moses. So this was not a word of all that Moses had commanded Joshua. Joshua did not read a word that Moses had not commanded him to follow. So all the assembly, the Israelites, including the women, the children, and the foreigners who lived among them. So a couple things to point out here. Remember, we talked about last week that at Gilgal, Bethel, eventually as it will be called, you remember that Joshua built an altar. And remember, from the description, it wasn't like a tiny altar. It was probably a massive monument. And on it was the Ten Commandments. And that's the reference there, the word of Moses, the law of Moses. That's the summary of all the law. And we said this was when you pass by, whether you're an Israelite, whether it was generations and generations forward, whether you were a foreigner, whether you were an immigrant, a foreigner living in their land, or a convert to the Jewish religion, that when you pass by this area, and when did you pass by? For trade, for travel, but also this was the center where they would come to gather. You would see what was the very core of belief, for this one, the Ten Commandments. This is how we are to live. If you ask, what does the Israelites believe religiously, socially, culturally? It was these things. This is the summary. Now you notice here in another area, they do the same exact thing. So this wasn't just one spot. That you will see this again and again, that throughout the land there will be different places as people will go. So therefore you can say, well, I don't live in the central area. I'm not really part of Israel anymore. Same thing. I live in the north, and those people in the south aren't like me. They talk a little different with a different dialect. They live in, they do different trade. They raise different herds. They're not really Israelites. This prevented that. That when you would travel south, you would see this massive altar with the same stone tablet, the same exact words written on them as in your home area, as in the central part. So there was this idea of this continuity of religion, of culture, of identity that the Israelites had. So This was also not just a testimony of God's blessing, but also you notice here again it says they renewed the covenant. They swore again to follow God, to love Him, to obey Him, to worship Him. So when you passed by this altar, when you brought sacrifices to this altar, you remembered your commitment. And when your children, your children's children, generations, when they came to these altars, they would be reminded this wasn't something culturally that you were born into. This was an active testimony of your faith and your belief and your commitment to God. Notice there something in verse 33, and then it's there just a little bit before, and the words are written. Quote here, both the foreigners living among them and the native born. So we see that as the Israelites came into this land, we already know, and it's not mentioned a lot, but we already know that when they left Egypt, there was some people, some Egyptians, some who realized the power of God and converted to serving the God of Israel. And now we see the writer here, tells us that there were people realizing the power of this God that these Israelites had and wanting to join this nation, to convert to them. So it wasn't just, the Israelites there, that they were having a powerful effect that people realized, wait a second, these gods I'm worshiping, this culture I'm involved in, it's useless. I want to serve this God. I want to, be a part of this community. So these people as well, committed. We don't really know how many of them were there, but again, one example of this, the Rahab. We talked about that in the Battle of Jericho. That how she assimilated, how she converted, that she was a foreigner, but yet generations in the future, one of her direct descendants, one of her great, and you can add the numbers to it, grandson became the king. You have a foreign person that's king, that they have to be a citizen of that nation, right? And then we fast forward multiple generations, thousands of years forward, that Christ came to earth to be the Messiah, direct line to that King David, to that foreigner Rahab. She wasn't just one little person that did that. The what we can take from this is that many foreign-born people became a part of the community and joined with them. So the Israelites, at this point, I'd say life is pretty good. They have a majority of this nation, these people groups, under their control. They're feared. They've, invaded. Remember, 40 years or so before, the reaction of their parents or their grandparents. The giants in the hills and these fortified cities and, all this, and we can't do this. But then their children, their grandchildren obeyed God and had faith in God, followed Him. And these people these children who their parents and grandparents said will be enslaved and will be killed if we cross that river, if we invade this land, now possess the land. They have won the land. So life was pretty good. They were starting to, again, settle down. They were starting to build homes. They were starting to scope out the land. Their enemies, for the most part, in the central part of the land, were destroyed. So life was good. Things were good. They were successful. The title of today is The Danger of Success. The danger of success. Let's look at chapter 9. So when an army comes against you, when an army invades your land, threatens you, you have two choices as a people, as a leader. Choice number one, fight them. You know, army comes in, they invade you, they're trying to take your land from you. Your first option is pick up your sword, pick up your shields, get in your chariots, and fight them, right? The second choice is to sue for peace. Go, hey, you guys are pretty powerful, and we really don't want to die, and we really don't want to, have our blood shed. So how can we make an agreement? How can we make you guys happy so that we're at peace? So the leaders of Gibeon, a city in the mountains of Israel, they hadn't been really bothered by these Israelites, but they looked out the plains and they had heard there was this people group, you know, that we'd heard this story of how this large group of slaves from Egypt, remember again, Egypt powerful, and all the city states within this region that the Israelites would become what we would call the promised land. They were not under typical, I guess the word is, Egyptian control, but they swore allegiance with Egypt because in that land, remember, the map, you have Egypt down here and you have the various Mesopotamian kingdoms up to the north, and here you have what we call today the Middle East because it's literally in the middle, of these two areas. Powerful group, bunch of little unrelated city groups that had kind of mixed loyalties. So you kind of decided who you were loyal to. So they kind of had a quasi relationship with Egypt, but all of a sudden, this group comes out of Egypt, powerful nation, and invading them. And Jericho, one of the first cities they come to. The story is that these people kind of marched around this city and blew trumpets and made a racket, and the walls collapsed. And then the next king and the next king kept falling, and all of a sudden these people go from a bunch of wandering slaves kind of playing on our borders to all of a sudden they're here and they mean business. So the people of Gibeon were Amorites. And again, we kind of look at some of these names and go, what does this mean? Because I don't see a city of Amorite. I don't see borders of Amor, of Amorin or whatever name we come up with. So where did these people come from? They were group again, these powerful nations or powerful cities, powerful communities that had a treaty, but they were also united by religion, by ethnicity, and culture. To basically somebody comes, a mutual aid agreement, I guess we could call it. They were kind of like the NATO or the Warsaw Bloc or the Axis or the Allies, kind of in modern history to relate to. That you get attacked, I'm going to pick up my sword and attack, the attacker. And if I get attacked, you other, 13, people groups are going to come, to my rescue. We're going to have this. So these Amorite kings got together and said, you know what? We got to get these invaders on. They've taken over the plains and whatever. Their next step is they're going to come for us. They're not going to beat us, but we're going to wipe them out. And hey, if we wipe them out, guess what? We get the plains. We get the fertile. The enemy of my enemy is my enemy, not my friend.
Yeah.
So let's, these Amorite kings, these 13 cities, they said, let's get together. And the Gibeons kind of looked and went, but there hasn't really been anybody successful. This God of theirs is more powerful. Because remember, in this time period, in their culture, that everything revolves around your religion. And they believe that the gods, in small quotes, that my God that I serve overruled those areas. That if I gave him my crops, did my religious acts, he would protect me. He would give me good harvest. He would bless the weather. He would make my family increase. He would protect me from enemies. So everybody believed that. But then you look down to the plains and you look, towards, the coastal area. What this God of the Israelites that nobody has heard of is defeating the gods because we talked a little bit about how the idea of a deity war as well as a human war. This God of these invaders is kicking all these other gods' butts that have been here for centuries. And so the Gibeonites go, don't know if our God that the Amorites serve, if they're really going to rescue us, they're going to really protect us because nobody else really been successful. So, not really happy about making war. Let's try a peace deal. But they had heard, I'm sure, again, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have newspapers, they didn't have even Telegraph and Pony Express. But again, you hear things. They heard that these Israelites weren't really into making peace. They were into this is ours, we're taking. So, if we walk and say, hey, we're a city group, we're allied with the Amorites and we want to make peace with you. Did these Israelites go for it? I don't know. We've heard their intention is to take everything. So, what are we going to do? This was kind of smart on their behalf. And this was kind of, they decided, let's use some trickery. So, what the Gibeonites did is you would have, what they talk about, these wineskins, this is what you carried your wine in, carried water in. Well, the reason why you took a brand new made skin and put wine in it because as wine, as the juice ferments, it's going to expand. A supple skin will expand with it, but an older one won't expand; it'll split open and leak, right? And then they took their clothes and they dirtied them. I mean, if you're going to go sue for peace, wear your Sunday best, right? You're going to dress up and you're going to look good and you're going to, they got all dirty and they let their beards grow and they look like travelers that have been going for a while. And they took bread that was moldy. Now, if you're going to travel down off your mountains to the plains, a couple days journey, moldy bread. Moldy bread. Well, moldy bread has been around for a while. You're not gonna take fresh bread and say, yeah. So the Gibeonites, hey, Israelite, we're from this nation far away. Not here. We've heard how impressive you guys are and how mighty and powerful. And you know what? We don't want any trouble. We're just this tiny little group, this tiny little city, which was kind of true, and we want peace. So if you sign a peace treaty with us, then we won't attack you. You leave us alone, and everybody be cool. Here's the thing: that the Israelites spent 2 days. The Israelite leaders. We'll see here in a few minutes what the difference is. The Israelite leaders took 2 days, talked about this. You know what? We've had a lot of success. We are getting kind of a mighty army. You know what? Why not? Because one of the things you do as an established nation, any nation, it doesn't matter, how closed off you are. Every nation needs some type of trade, some type of contact with other nations. There's no nation in history that has lasted more than, I'd say, a century, probably being generous, that hasn't had some type of contact with the quote unquote outside world. we've talked about, how China, back in, the 70s, they tried to close themselves off. Well, that became very, very unsuccessful. That Japan, back in the late, up until probably, I think, the late 600s, the 18th century, they were a closed kingdom. They knew where other nations were, but it wasn't until the United States made first contact in a way with them that kind of forced them out into the world realm. That if they hadn't had that contact, eventually, people would come in and invade them and take them over. So, the Israelites said, "Yeah, you know what? We're eventually going to be a nation. We'll probably establish some trade alliances, maybe, because again, they have to go north of Mesopotamia for trade. Eventually, they've got to reestablish some type of relationship with Egypt. And again, remember what we talked about. Their nation has not one, not two, but three major trade routes connected to. Yeah, maybe we should have some relationship. Yeah, that's a good idea. So 2 days later, after they discussed, emphasize that because keep that in mind in a couple months. They signed a treaty to the Gibeonites. They said, "Sure, we are never going to attack you as long as you never attack us." They signed this covenant, and they went through this whole covenant ceremony that we talked about a bunch of different times. We're going to be, we will, have trade with you. We'll have relationships with you. You leave us alone. We'll leave you alone. Life is good. Israelite leaders probably will pat themselves on the head. First diplomatic, victory. Well, a little while later, the Israelites had built this altar, and they said, "Okay, phase 3. We've done the north. We've established the core of the central. And we got all these little guys over here to the south and to the east. And these mountainous people. Let's go after. We got to go and invade them now because they're going to be a problem. Because again, if you have this nice wide open plain, but you have enemies up staring down at you, what's going to happen? They're going to come down off the mountain. They're going to attack you, and they're going to run back up to their mountain. So take the momentum and go after them." And so they started marching. Then all of a sudden, these 13 Amorite kings got together and said, "Okay, enough's enough. Let's get these Israelites out of here before they invade our nice little realm of our mountains." So they called all the kings together. 12 of them showed up. King of Gibeon stayed home. The Amorites are doing the roll call. Why didn't the Gibeonites show up? We made peace with Israel. What? We made peace with them. We're not going to attack. We're not going to attack them. But you made a treaty with us. Sorry. Too bad. And so the Amorites said, "We can't do this because if you tolerate a breaking of one party, what's going to happen? Another city's going to say, you know what, those Gibeonites are pretty smart. They're going to break off, and they're going to break off, and they're going to break off. And your alliance was down the toilet." I shouldn't use that word, but it's gone, right? Dead and buried. So, little tiny Gibeonites refused to honor your word to us, even, you're culturally and politically, economically and religiously more connected to us than you are to them. You're my enemy. So these 12 kings mounted up. Let's go destroy Gibeon. The Gibeonites, you are traitors. Let's go. So now the Gibeonites are in a little bit of a stew, right? The Israelites are marching towards the Amorites, and all of a sudden we get word from this people far off in the land who were there a few weeks ago with their moldy bread their dirty clothes, their wore out animals. Hey, the Amorites are attacking us. What? Remember that treaty you made with us? The Amorites are attacking us. Wait a second. You're a mountain people? We thought you were way far away. King Gibeon could have said, I never asked. You never looked at my passport where it was stamped. You never investigated. But right here, I got the treaty. You got to protect us. So the Israelites, instead of maybe whatever path they were going to take, now they've gotten sucked into, okay, guys, they tell their warriors, they tell their generals, attack everybody else, but not the Gibeonites. Go back there a little bit. I said it a couple times here. The leaders talked about this, right? They talked about this treaty. They talked about, this peace. They never consulted the people, and not once do we hear that they consulted God. Remember, the leader of their nation, the one that directs everything, that never consulted God. So the people's reaction, they were not impressed with their leaders. They're like, wait a second. Who come up with this bright idea? We're leaving these people? So the Israelites did honor, in chapter 10 here, the Israelites did honor that agreement. What would eventually happen is the Gibeonites would become basically the hired help. That they would have the lowest of lowest status in the community. They would do the lowest of lowest jobs in the nation. And in a few hundred years, we will see how this people group became a thorn in the side and became an issue to the Israelites. All because their leadership, all they had to do was go to God. Hey, God, these people showed up. We don't know anything about them. They say they're foreigners. Should we protect them? Should we tell them, go back home, our armies are going to come at you? What should we do? Never once did they consult God. The application to our own life, that you need to have constant communication with God. Yeah, that was pretty good. That my family believes in you. Things are going to feel really good in my faith. Every decision that we make, we need to consult God, because we're frail little human beings. Doesn't matter how long we've served God, how long, how much we know the Bible, how many hours we spend serving Him. We still have that human frailty, and we have the tendency to make wrong decisions. And we make wrong decisions, that our course of our life gets changed sometimes. We go from, conquering the mountains to now we get sucked into a civil war. We get caught up in drama that we shouldn't be a part of. We make wrong financial decisions. We fall to temptation. So what we need to understand from this lesson is, especially if we have leadership, the longer we've been with God, the more so we need to spend time in prayer, to spend time in His Word, and consult with other people of faith about the decisions that we make, or else we could run the risk of falling into issues. And those issues may not just affect us personally, but may affect our community, our church, and generations down the road. So the Israelites gritted their teeth, honored their treaty. Chapter 10. And so they waged a battle between 12 of the 13 kings of the Amorites. And we see something here that kind of unique. That God allowed nature to join into this battle. You notice here in verse 11, as the armies of the Amorites were marching towards the Israelites, and this is how you did it. You fought a battle that your army side, my army would line up on the other side, and we charge after you, and whoever didn't run away or whoever was left standing at the end of the battle was the victor. So this is how it was done. So the Israelites knew that God was with them, but he demonstrated in a powerful way. It says here, a hailstorm struck the people, struck the Amorites, and destroyed many of them. These people were people of chariots, which was something relatively new in history. But they would get in these chariots. They would fight. Well, the Israelites still at this point were mainly a ambulatory army. They would march. They really didn't have, we see in Israelites' history in the military, they didn't incorporate horses or chariots, not really until Solomon was king. Hundreds of years later. They more, were on their feet. So that could have been, technology. It'd be like, sitting in your trenches in World War I and seeing tanks come at you. What's this? This technology change. But then God, this hailstorm. Remember Egypt? Not just a tiny little hailstorm. Remember what the hailstorm that God sent did to the Egyptians? It wiped out their crops. It wiped out their herds. And again, keep in mind that the religious belief of this time and their actions was very connected to nature. When the sun was shining, your God was blessing you. When the rains came in the dry season, your God was blessing you. And then the opposite. So in the middle, around the time of, probably we believe early harvest time, according to, the calendar, the Jewish calendar, when your crops are just starting to bud and you start to have hope for the fall, that it's going to be a good winter. But so you decide to go out and fight a battle, and all of a sudden this hailstorm wipes people out. Again, these stories have come up out of Egypt for 40 years of how this God of Israelites had all these plagues. The Amorites are like, to me, would be like, wait a second here. This hail, and it was massive hail. We've seen some pretty big ones sometimes in storms. If you go out to the Midwest in the South, we have reports of, softball hail. Well, if you have softball hail hitting you, no matter how much armor you have, your horse is pulling your chariots, it's going to do some damage. And you're still going into a battle. And then look at verses 12 through 13. That there is recorded a longer day. That Joshua prayed, to God, the sun and the moon. Again, these people, their belief, when you saw the sun and the moon in the same sky together during the day, not like, at sunrise or sunset or moonrise or moonset, but during the day, that was an evil omen. Because these Canaanite gods believed the sun was a god and the moon was a god, and they kind of had this opposing agreement not to mess with each other, not to appear. Dark, that god, the moon god, that was his realm. Daytime, the sun god, that was his realm. And they kind of didn't mess with each other. They didn't appear to each other. But if they appeared in the sky at the same time in the bright daytime, that's an omen. That's our gods are fighting. And when the gods fight, it's going to be trouble for us. So this happened. And so the Israelites defeated, these 12, notice that they would attack a city at a time, and all of a sudden they're attacking armies of 12 cities, fighting with them. We assume, not really said, that the Gibeonites picked up the spear, I hope, but I'm wondering because of the reaction that the Israelites, Joshua said to the Gibeonites, from now on, you will be our servants. I wonder if the Gibeonites just hold up in their city and said, yeah, they hit us. The Israelites just found out we tricked them. They're ticked at us. The Israelites said they would protect us, so we're not involved. You ever been in that situation where somebody is started the fire, then sits back and throws gasoline on it and doesn't get involved in it? That's what was happening. Gibeonites created a mess, and I believe, this is me, there's not really evidence one way or the other. I believe they locked themselves in the city. And so the Israelites were really, really ticked. First, they got tricked by their own, instead of just simply helping God, investigating more. That two, now they're fighting a different battle than they planned. And the Gibeonites aren't joining them. So I think that's the reaction, why that happened. So you notice here in verse 13, a little reference. The book of Joshua. Where's that in the Bible? It's not there. So there are quote unquote lost books, that that if we go back even 250 years ago, the founding of the United States, there are letters that between some of the founding fathers that I believe I was just reading recently, John Adams, after his death, that his wife burned all the letters that he had sent to her through his travels, because he was, serving the government a lot, both here in the country and overseas. That all the letters she wrote to him and all the letters he wrote to her burned. Now these letters, that the ones we do have, aren't just like imminent details between a husband and a wife. That they're talking about events, they're talking about debates. We don't know why she burned them. It was kind of sometimes almost, I think it was like a tradition or something like that during that time he did that. But think of the history. Adam's personal viewpoint of what was going on, Declaration of Independence, what was going on, the writing of the Constitution, what was going on while he was a minister in France, and we've kind of lost that personal, because she burned the letters. And again, she was very politically minded. So while she was there with the children, recording events and recording things and sending it to him. So there are books that have been written that have been lost. We don't know what this book of Joshua is, that maybe he was a scribe that recorded events. So that's the issue. Sure.
I don't know the book, but if you go back to the historians write, as well as the figures that are writing, the historical books that you got, the Bible, the first few talks,
Right.
Right.
And then they were lost. Now, again, there's a lot of explanations why. Maybe during that we have accounts of the library in Alexandria of how great it is. We don't have it now because it was destroyed. It was lost. That during the Babylonian and Assyrian invasion of Israel and the destruction of the nation, and then later on the Greek destruction of Israel, and then the Romans, and then the nation being scattered for thousands of years. There was probably a lot of history, a lot of notes, a lot of mundane things that we would be fascinated with that aren't there, but the core belief is still there. So again, the reason why I bring that out is because I've talked a lot about these biblical critique, and say, well, again, it says here that there's books here involved this Bible can't be true because it's missing this. Here's a reason why these books are banned. You know, again, keep in mind there was 12 Bill of Rights, 12 amendments. The first 12 amendments were proposed. How many amendments are in the Bill of Rights? 10. 2 of them never got enacted. Did it make the other 10 any less authoritative? No. This is what the people, through the voting process and everything, these 10 we agree on. The Bible, for whatever reason, these are the books that were preserved by God. You know, did we get the color of Joshua's robe on, third year of the Sabbath? No. We don't know what's in these, so what's important is we have this, and this is authoritative. All right, so let's move on to the chapter 27. Or, excuse me, chapter 10, verse 27. Let me look here. Yeah, I know, I'm going way ahead. All right, so let me read you I went ahead of myself. Chapter 11, verse 23. So Joshua took the entire land, just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel, according to their tribal divisions. And the land had rest from war. So they became a nation. They planted crops. They built homes. They were a nation. Now, this doesn't mean that at this time they possess the whole land. That you will still see along the coast, there's these people groups. We're going to talk about them next week. And they're going to rise up over the next few centuries to be bothersome. It's these people called the Philistines. Remember we talked about the sea peoples and back during Egypt, right after the time of Joseph, how there was a culture that, in Egypt there was this group that ruled Egypt that wasn't really ethnic. They were of the sea people. This is the same descendants, the same ethnicity, and the Bible refers to them as Philistines. They reside along the coast. You notice as you trace the battles, the Israelites weren't really attacking the coast because they weren't a coastal people. They were farmers. They were herdsmen. So they weren't seafaring people. So that's why they were there. And they were concerned more about the central part that received the majority of the nation. So they established communities. They became a nation. And so next week we're going to come to the end of literally this epic in history that we have when we started. For 400 years, these people were trapped in slavery. And then this former prince who was born an Israelite tried to, on his own power, reform things, didn't work. Became a shepherd out in the wilderness. And then Moses was sent to bring the people out. And then for 4 decades, they could see the land, but didn't possess it. And then for the past, probably by biblical count, 4.5 years, they conquered it. And now these people are established. Joshua's still a leader, even though he's into his 80s at this point. And they become a nation. And next week, what we're going to look at is kind of the neat thing that starts here. Remember, Moses gathered all the people together before he anointed Joshua as his replacement and reminded them of their history, reminded them of the covenant that God had with them, reminded them of their duties and their responsibilities and blessings. This is what Joshua does. The same thing, except for one thing. I'm going to leave it. And then the next epic, the beginning, in 2 weeks, we're going to see how that affects the nation of Israel. So, today, the takeaway. So, again, let me go. Next week, we're going to look at chapters 13 through the end of Joshua 22. 13 through 22. Can't read my writing. So basically 13 to the end of the book. The takeaway is God blesses us. God has great things for us. Don't rest on your laurels. Don't think that you know it all. You know, you're smart. You can outsmart God. That when something comes to you that seems great, we talk about a lot of times in the hard times of life. Go to God. Go to God in the good times. Basically, go to God all the time. That it's easy when things are going well in our life to kind of rest in our laurels, eat from those giant vines. Remember what God said to them? There will come a time when you'll eat from fruit that you didn't plant. And you'll make bread from wheat you didn't plant. You'll live in houses you didn't build. It is at that time you need to watch your heart, watch your soul, watch your mind. Because it's those times you can fall away from God. Those times you can compromise with an enemy whose disguise is your friend. Let's close it. Heavenly Father, thank you. We thank you for all the great things that you give to us and you have taught us. Lord, we pray that you give us the wisdom, you give us the faith, you give us the hope and the trust. Not in the hard times of life, because we know we need to do that. You give that to us when things seem to be doing so good, so easy. Lord, that's when we need you even more to keep us on the right path that you have. We ask you bless us. We ask you bless the Pastor Tammy as she shares later on this morning and our worship service. All right, folks, you have a good week. You have a blessed Thanksgiving. See you next week.